right? So, and black, brown folk getting to the money out here, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, boom, there goes more exposure, right? This is something else that's shaping me, putting me on the trajectory that ultimately I'm on. I graduate high school. I go to Georgia State University, which graduates the most black people of any college in this country, and I have that experience, and I end up in traditional corporate following my graduation. I graduated with a marketing degree, which that we should note that because now I work in tech, right?
Mm-hmm.
So I graduated from college. I end up working in big tobacco, and I'm working for RJ Reynolds. All of a sudden, I'm displaced. For one, I moved from Atlanta to Louisiana, a very small corner of Louisiana, and I'm working in a tobacco industry. I don't smoke. I'm actually a health and wellness professional, and not at that point, but I am now.
Yeah.
And I'm essentially selling product, building business that is not helping my people. Frankly, it's hurting my people, and that put a fire in me. Like, I got to
Yeah.
figure this out. I cultivated, or not cultivated. I honed some skills. That's for sure. They invest in their talent, and I learned how to articulate value proposition. And hone some skill sets that are transferable, right? And I just knew, man, with the opportunity of whether it's selling something that would benefit people that look like myself, or whatever the function of the company is, I just knew I had to get out. And I think ultimately, I'm going to be honest, I think I manifested the next opportunity, which from the tobacco industry was an opportunity in the nonprofit space. And
Interesting.
I got an opportunity to interview for an organization, the National Black MBA Association, which is the longest running, or one of the longest running organizations that's prioritizing uh, hmm, prioritizing getting black and brown folk jobs. Just to say it frankly, 20,000 plus members in that organization, and they have 300 plus corporate partnerships. And I was put in a role where now, instead of selling cigarettes, I'm selling programming that is going to help these companies diversify their talent pipelines. That's going to help these companies retain black and brown folk. And oh, I could do that.
Oh, I think this is so interesting because I think this is something that I've heard a lot is, and I think we should talk about this manifesting, but I think this is a huge point in your life is a lot of people I feel like are in jobs. A lot of listeners are in jobs they may hate, that they may feel like, man, not only do I not necessarily like what I do on a day-to-day basis, but man, this company is hard to work with either because of
Mhm.
what they do to me or what it seems like they're selling. So can you talk about that transition point, right? Like where were you at mentally? What things did you do? How did you network? What were the tools that you used to make that transition from where you were to where you wanted to be?
Yeah, man. Like, what's so great. Like, I say it now jokingly: stay ready so you don't have to get ready. And I didn't realize what I was preparing for, but I was preparing for what I'm doing now. And for one, the amount of imposter syndrome I had working in that industry.
Mm,
I'm a man with, like I said, you see how you made a comment at the very beginning about my parents, but working in that industry, they didn't know any idea. They I was a shell of myself. They didn't even know I had tattoos. There was a lot about me that they didn't know, and I didn't feel as though I had the space to be myself. And um, I did a lot of reading. And one thing I realized along the way is that you know people people listen to me, and that at the end of the day, what it all comes down to, whether we're talking about corporations and community, whether we're talking about your household and your relationships, whether we're talking, it all comes, every transactions all come down to trust.
mhm.
And a very important book that I read at that point of my life when I'm trying to figure it out and get the heck up out of there was a book called The Speed of Trust by Stephen Covey. And
Mm.
ultimately, it crystallized some things for me that have helped me foster high trust relationships in a way that, have uh, led to me being in the position that I'm in. I'm in a trusted leadership position that connects community to opportunity. So that book was really important for me to read. Michelle Alexander's um, uh, uh, the new Jim Crow, mass incarceration. Like I was doing a lot of reading at that point in time because again, I felt like I was doing work that wasn't beneficial to my people. I had to balance that energy, right? And I was finding myself, finding my voice, um, digging in, and really preparing myself. Again, I didn't know what I was preparing for, but as soon as I got that call, I won that interview, and I won a lot of other conversations and interviews since.
Yeah, it seems like in correct me if I'm wrong here. It seems like your ability to build trust really ties into what you know. What is it? Dream.org is doing. Like, especially what you
Absolutely.
just said. Bring like talk about that. Like, how do you build trust with the community? Because I do think especially the black community, is a lot smarter than people try to give the black community credit. You can't just be putting stuff up on your website and say, "We
Mm.
love black people. Happy June 19th." Like it takes another level, I think, and speak to that because I think companies oftentimes want that trust from the black community, and then they do a June 19th post and feel like, okay, what else do you need? And so I think this is really important for people to hear.
Yeah, for sure. Man, dream.org. I'm so blessed and to be real, to be I'm not just a part of this ecosystem, not just a leader within this organization. Um, it's an amazing organization. And um, what I say, and then I'll dive into specifically what the mission of dream.org is and so forth. But like you said, it's not what you put on your website. It's not um, w- what you communicate, externally to the public, communities of color specifically. So often we focus on what dream.org focuses on, and honestly, what I focus on, which is why empathy again is on my chest, is how, right? It's
Preach.
how, like
Yes.
how trust, which is to many people this soft, intangible thing. So is how, like how is, you know, like I said, how, why, those are very important questions. But oftentimes we talk about
Mhm.
where we want to go, what we want to do. Dream.org, and the reason why they were just such this mm, soul and mission alignment was because Dream.org really prioritized how they do the work. And Dream.org brings people together across racial, social, partisan lines to create a future with freedom and dignity and opportunity for all. The overall mission of Dream.org is to close prison doors, open doors of opportunity, right? And there are
Yeah.
three social pillars, three divisions within the organization. There's Justice, which leads the largest national network of system impacted leaders. These are individuals that have been incarcerated. Um, they advance bipartisan policy reform, meaning they work with folk on both sides of the aisle, and they support innovative tech-based solutions. They're responsible for the First Step Act, which
Wow.
Trump took responsibility for, but that's brought home over 20,000 people early, brothers and
Yeah.
sisters early, from incarceration. That's one pillar within Dream.org. Then there's Green for All, which works for cleaner air, water, affordable energy, good jobs for all. Two things are going on right now in the world. Well, there's a lot of things going on in the world, but I'll say two things that we care about, especially. Um, One is the world is changing rapidly, fast, right? Because of technological innovation, technological advances. But also, this world is on fire, right? There's a climate problem. and the powers that be, the biggest corporations, the public sector, is really voicing that as well. So if you think about it, not too many people know, but $369 billion was authorized through the Inflation Reduction Act, and it's organizations like Green for All that are in place and in position to ensure that the communities most challenged by pollution are those that receive these funds, and these disadvantaged communities are prioritized to transform. So, without an organization like Greenfall, which has had political wins that amount to billions of dollars moved on the behalf of communities of color and challenged communities, that money would not, or probably the likelihood that that money would go where it needs to go,
Mhm.
right? How confident would you be that it would go to where it needs to go? And that's the type of work that Green for All is doing, ensuring not just that climate or pollution is being mitigated, but also ensuring that as new economies emerge because of um, authorizations, like I just mentioned, as generational wealth is created, that Black and Brown communities have access to opportunities in that new sector. And then
Mhm.
lastly, there's the tech program, which we create economic opportunity for the advancement of Black and Brown talent. Technology supercharges any solution. And I'll say that again, it supercharges any solution. So if you think about the solutions, you think about the the you think about how much talent from communities of color are able to do with the least. Imagine what talent with lived experience, imagine what they'd be capable of if empowered and given access to resources, new skills that are relevant, in the future work. So not just good paying jobs, but also you're empowering talent that's gonna be solution oriented to come up with solutions that'll help transform these communities as well.
I love those three pillars. I think that they're really important. I have personal connections to all of them. I do think, for the sake of the fact that we don't have endless amounts of time for this podcast, I'm gonna get into one, right, that may actually get to all of them. And I think the big issue um, that all of these areas seem to be solving to some extent is one that we actually already talked about, which is systematic barriers, right? Systematic racism that have been put in place. For the sake of our conversation and zooming us in, I'm going to focus on what that looks like in the tech community. So I was recently reading a Forbes article. Let me see if I can find the name here. Yeah. So the Forbes article was Rebuilding Tech for Diversity Through Times of Adversity. The article talked a little bit about all the layoffs that have been going on. Over 141,000 people have been laid off from tech, some ways to fix it. They talk a little bit about how, retention should be done. You should be looking at how you're kind of retaining people, but majority of the article focuses on hiring. I want to get your thoughts on this, right? When we look at the tech industry and some of the layoffs that have taken place, 141,000 people let go. What is the aspect where these programs can really help these companies when they start to rebuild?
Yeah. Um, yeah, there's some layers. I'm gonna, for one, go back to one word that I mentioned before, which is trust,
Mhm.
right? So what's interesting, and I'm going to speak to trust in a couple ways, right? For one, like you said, you mentioned earlier the intelligence of communities of color.
Mhm.
You have companies that are servicing communities of color. However, their talent bases aren't reflective of the communities that they serve, right?
Mhm.
So for one, that's a signal, right? So in terms of how a company bridges that gap or does the work to bridge that gap and elevate trust between them and the community, and they can do that in various ways. Obviously proclamations by their leaders, speaking to the importance of diversifying their workforce. Um, in addition to that, making investments, not just investments, philanthropic, throwing money at this, throwing money at that, but actually investing into the upskilling, right? Invest in the training, invest in resources, or drive access to resources that'll help talent of color, especially, upskill, right? Because
Hmm.
this is a critical time where everybody should be considering their skill sets.
Hmm.
46% of the jobs that exist today are expected to be gone by 2030. There's also an additional prediction that 900,000 jobs will be created annually. Not that's 900, 900 or 90,000, 900 new jobs, 900,000 new jobs annually between now and 2032. And that's especially because of that influx, that $369 billion that's been authorized. We're talking an entire new industry, entire new sector that will be built because of that investment. So this is a critical time where everybody should be considering their skill sets. And what better a moment in time for companies, these powers that be, to say, hey, we want to do this different going forward.
And
We may have knee jerk reacted really fast as COVID hit, and we had to uh, sustain our day-to-day functions virtually. Like COVID, part of the reason why there's such huge layoffs is because companies saw success actually when COVID happened. They saw greater returns by expanding their technical teams, right? Because functions, business, look how we're convening right now, look how we're talking.
yeah,
The infrastructure needed to sustain day-to-day operations, to expand e-commerce, um, technical talent was needed. And those are just a couple areas that I'm naming. But as on the back end of COVID, leaders at some of the biggest companies you can think of said, you know what, we may have overhired,
yeah.
and like I said, moving forward during this window where it's critically important that talent people upskill, companies could stand up and make investments and direct funds specifically to the upskilling of diverse talent.